Welcome everyone. Pro Talent Recruitment, we obviously specialize in recruitment, and we've got quite an extensive network of affiliates, and Andries is one of our affiliates, and he is incredible. He's actually specifically helped us with quite a few issues in the past, and even helped us with our documentation and everything. So he is amazing, and he's from LabourSolve, and he'll be addressing the bulk of the issues today of how to address poor performers. So I'm going to hand over to Andries, and he'll start his presentation.
Thank you for that, Nicky. Yes, everyone, it's a privilege for me to have this opportunity to hopefully put some extra tools in your toolbox and to help you to be aware of certain things that can improve the way that you hold your staff accountable for performance. Before I share my screen, I just want to say that when we talk about performance, a lot of people deem it to be a very formal process, and there's a lot of different perceptions regarding performance, and invariably it leads to a lot of confusion, or it either doesn't get done or done incorrectly, and the outcomes are not as expected. But so hopefully today I can just highlight a few things that will assist by clearing the process. I'm going to show you some slides, so if you can just bear with me. I'm going to just get my share screen going here. My goodness, I'm used to it. Sorry, it was here, and now for some weird and wonderful reason, you can just bear with me 2 seconds. Then I see it keeps on asking me to recover it from a different site, so I just need to quickly get it open here. You can just bear with me 2 seconds if you don't mind, and I'll okay, I think I've been able to get that from the right place. So there you can see. Right. Thanks for bearing with me. As you can see, let's deal with this, for some people, the unwanted issue of performance in the workplace, so that we can see what it entails. What I want to show you is where it actually starts. The process actually starts with what is called Schedule 8 of the Code of Good Practice Dismissal, and more specifically Item 9. So I'm going to just show you what it actually requires, because that is the basis of when we talk about performance and holding accountable for the issues to consider. And it's very important that we look at it. Item 9, which is basically in the document, the paragraph 9, and as you can see, it says any person determining whether a dismissal for poor performance is unfair, you should consider whether the person failed or not a specific performance standard. And that is critical. A lot of times people are unhappy because people are not meeting the expectation of the employer. But the manager, on behalf of the employer or the employer himself, find it very difficult to hold the person appropriately accountable, purely because the person has got a perception or assume certain things, instead of having very clear-cut performance outcome of employing that person. And good labor relations or staff relations, everything starts with good recruitment. So if you drop the ball with your recruitment because you didn't talk to Nicky, then you're already on the back foot. But to further complicate things, a lot of people don't have clear-cut performance standards as an outcome that they wish to see by employing a certain individual. So you first got to consider, do you have a performance standard which this person failed to meet? And if he did not meet the required standards, you got to consider the following issues. The first one is whether the person was aware or could reasonably be expected to have been aware of the required performance. And a common misconception is that it has to be in writing and the person must have signed for it. Yes, that is the ultimate nice to have. If a person is aware of that standard and it's in writing and he signed for it, but it can also be standard practice that the person is aware of what is the appropriate way to perform a certain part of his functions. And as long as you can prove that he was aware, purely because he maybe did it successfully in the past, then that would be deemed to be sufficient. But the awareness is the first step. The next the next issue is the fair opportunity. So obviously the person, before coming to dismissal, you must have addressed it and given the person a fair opportunity, meaning a fair chance and period of time to meet that performance standard. And then lastly, whether dismissal was deemed to be appropriate for not meeting that performance standard. So that last part is sometimes where I can call it the porridge is on the floor, and I'm gonna quickly look at a few misconceptions that people commonly encounter in the workplace when it comes to holding people accountable for their performance. In the recent past, there's been a labor appeal court that where Ubuntu Education Fund versus Paulson, who's the CCMA commissioner, and obviously other parties party to it, that cleared that is the current standard and case law of dealing with performance management. And most of the time, we have this common notion of putting people on probation, and part of effective performance management starts with the probation period. And we need to understand that probation is clearly defined as that to give the employed opportunity to evaluate the employee's performance before confirming the appointment. So before we say you are indeed a permanent employee, we need to give you the opportunity to show us that you are able. And what this labor appeal court, which is quite a senior court, if you take it that the labor court itself is equivalent to the high court. So yeah, we sit with the labor appeal court, which is of higher authority than a high court, saying that, listen, if you performance manage a person on probation properly, and you're still busy with getting this person to meet your expectations, and you haven't completed such process, then it doesn't mean just because the probation period came to an end that the person is automatically permanent, although that is in general the notion if you don't have a proper performance management process on the go. But if you're in the process of performance managing the person, the mere fact that his probation come to an end still doesn't mean he's automatically permanent. A big misconception is that people don't do assessments during probation. They wait till the end of probation and then decide, sorry, I like you, or I don't like you. If I like you, I appoint you in a permanent capacity, or just by plain allowing you to carry on working, or if I don't like you and say, no, sorry, now I'm firing you because you're not meeting my expectations. You'll have to performance manage a person even more diligently than with your other staff during probation, because that is the basis how you show that you've got a body of evidence that justifies not appointing this person in a permanent manner. Then also a big misconception is that I just use warnings. Warnings is a disciplinary action, so therefore I just use my disciplinary process, giving you warnings for poor work performance. But as you can see from that previously, that Schedule 8 process, you can't just give warnings without having proof that you considered and given time for the person to correct his behavior and understand and whether the person is indeed capable and able to perform. Then also from an employee perspective, again, they say you can't fire me for poor work performance because you didn't offer me any training or I wasn't trained. But the law has said you need to be whatever is appropriate. So it doesn't mean that the mere fact that I didn't train you, now it is automatically a problem, because maybe training is not required because you come with previous prior experience prior being engaged in this position. So it is one needs to assess what was required from the employer to enable the employee to perform adequately. And also another misconception is that probation is only always has to be 3 months. It doesn't. As long as you can justify why it is for either a shorter or a longer period, then that is fine. There's nothing in law that says probation is only. As long as you go back to the reason for probation, and that is sufficient time to evaluate whether this person can adequately meet your expectations. So if you need more, then you can engage with me afterwards. But your contracts of employment is critical in the way it has to be drafted so that you don't run into problems regarding the extension of probation or how long an appropriate probationary period is to be, and how to performance manage the person so that the person can't say just because my probation period ended that I'm automatically now a permanent employee. When we look at our performance management of a particular individual or individuals, it is a process. And for that process, especially the larger your organization is, the more formal process it has to be, meaning maybe a policy or so that there is consistency in the manner in which every staff member is addressed, so that one person can't say I've been treated more harsh than a colleague of mine just because we manage by different managers. There's a common uniform process of dealing with people that do not meet the expectations of the employer in the way they perform their duties and responsibilities. So the process, you at liberty to decide. There's no legal prescription as to what that process looks like. And you can decide, and it is common practice to have informal ways of addressing, be it informal counseling or just have a chat to the employee and say, listen, we're not happy. You're supposed to do A, B, and C, but we're not happy that you do it to the standard that we require. And then you leave the person to correct his behavior, but obviously it escalates. And then maybe it escalates into a counseling session, and then maybe later on a formal counseling session. So you determine what frequency of informal ways and interventions you are having in place before you escalate it to a formal investigation. Now, poor work performance falls under the umbrella of incapacity. So under incapacity, you've got either for health reasons or performance reasons. So the formal process would imply that you issue a formal notice to the employee to attend an incapacity investigation relating to his performance. And that is, at that stage, it's almost like your final drawing the line in the sand process, where you say, listen, all our previous informal ways, on counseling sessions, did not give us the desired outcome. And therefore, we now escalated to a very formal process where normally people like ourselves would facilitate a process like that to investigate, as per that Schedule 8, is the person aware of the performance standards? And if so, is there a valid reason for him for not meeting the standard? Because sometimes you're unhappy for a staff member not giving you the required output, but you haven't enabled him, either through training, on-the-job training. You want him to staple papers, but you didn't give him a stapler. It sounds very simple, but you need to make sure that when you want to hold someone accountable for performance, that the individual is fully enabled to meet those expectations. When we get to the formal, after the formal notice, that investigation takes place, and it could, as an alternative to terminating the person's service, you could offer that person even a demotion, as opposed to keep on holding him accountable, and it looks like that person just don't have that capacity to perform at the level required. One could then offer a demotion as an alternative to keep him employed, but at a different level and maybe with less responsibility. But outcome of that process is there's a written outcome that summarizes the scope of that meeting, and this is the only time that you would formally use a formal warning as part of the process. The purpose of that final written warning is to, first of all, to highlight to the employee that this is his last chance. This is your final warning, that if you're not going to correct your behavior, then there can only be one consequence, and the person needs to understand that he will be fired or his service will be terminated if he fails to adhere to the requirements in terms of output. And the second purpose is also, there's no underestimation of the seriousness with which the employer perceives his non-performance. So that is the purpose of that final written warning. The one is understand that it's his last chance to correct his behavior, and that it is serious because his service will be terminated if he doesn't perform. Then there has to be a defined period to correct his behavior. Normally, the CCMA don't look like a period less than 3 weeks, but the contents and of the outcome, meaning, is it a salesperson, is it a admin clerk, whatever the position the employee fill, that would determine what is appropriate in terms of the period. But normally it's about a month, 3 weeks to a month, but it also can be longer. And then obviously, if the person then still fails to meet the expectations as spelled out in that outcome, then to ensure procedural fairness, one do a disciplinary inquiry, charge the person for poor work performance, and then again, if there's no valid reason and he is aware and as per the Schedule 8 requirements, then if there's nothing more that the employer can do to assist, that would mean the end of the road for an individual. But it starts with a proper contract of employment, a proper process, and to ensure fairness, so that all staff are treated in a similar way at all times, so that you don't become subjective. What I've shown is, and don't worry, you don't have to write down the contents of this document, but this is a formal, and if you're interested, I can make that available to you. It's a basic performance evaluation of a staff member. If you don't have any instrument of any kind, this is a basic instrument, as you can see there, that helps you address the correct issues, and that it's properly recorded, and that it is objective as possible, and it forms a record of your, let's call it your attempts to correct the behavior of the employee. But if it leads to no improvement, then obviously a formal incapacity investigation needs to be held. What is there's a different angle which I want to highlight to you today, and that is usually with performance, sometimes certain positions, the onus of proof is obviously on the employer, and it's very difficult to prove poor work performance in some instances because it's not so clearly defined as to the outcome that you require. Quite a senior CCMA commissioner chatting in the passages at one stage gave us a very good advice, and that is that because the onus of proof is on you as the employer, certain aspects of performance of duties are much easier addressed and can be much easier proven when, instead of dealing with a matter as poor work performance, you deal with it under the banners of insubordination and negligence. What it means is, if you give a person instruction to do a certain thing and he fails to do that, then it's a form of misconduct, and you'll rather deal with it as misconduct because it's much easier to prove and it's easier to hold the person accountable, therefore, and less risk when it comes to terminating the service of such a person, because he either failed to follow instructions or he was just negligent in the performance of his duties, meaning he knew what was the right thing to do and he failed to do it. There's a very thin line between poor work performance and negligence, but if you apply it correctly, you shouldn't have a problem. But if you don't know how to do that, hence I will give you my contact details. We'll assist employers with knowing what is the right thing to do. But that is an alternative to make maybe your life easier, is to say, rather, where possible, deal with it as a form of misconduct when people don't comply with instructions or fail to do the right thing, as opposed to the performance management. But you need to plan, because planning to fail, you're going to run into problems. There is my contact details. If you require assistance, you're more than welcome to take down my details or via Nicky obtain that. But in summary, I want to highlight the fact that, first of all, recruit quality staff. And once they're recruited, to have them on the appropriate contract of employment that stipulate, have the correct stipulations regarding probation. During probation, even though there's it's less onerous on the employer to show that the person is not capable to meet your requirements and therefore to terminate their service during probation, you need to make sure your probation clauses are in place. You manage the performance frequently and appropriately. Your record keeping is done appropriately, that you have a uniform process to deal with performance management, whether it's for staff on probation or otherwise, and that when you go a formal route, that you apply that Schedule 8, Item 9, as far as what would be fair factors to consider when deciding on terminating someone's service for poor work performance. But that is my 2 cents worth. I trust that it will be of assistance, because if you want to have that little document to use as a tool in the absence of anything else, contact me. I'll make that available to you. And if you need more assistance, then you also more than welcome to contact me. That's me, and I'm going to hand you over to Nicky, who will bring that, build on that. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share that with you.
Perfect. Andries, we actually have a question from Rena. So I don't know if you want to open up your chat. The other question that you need to answer.
If on the job, the question just for everyone's clarity is on the job training is 90% required. Why should an employee be getting a warning for that? Shouldn't the job performance, you're going to have the one's training skills that have been completed? 100%. You can't hold people accountable if they haven't. Obviously, it comes back to am I capable and able to meet those requirements? So obviously, the person has not been enabled to meet that performance standard because he's still busy with that on-the-job training. So you will need to, in that process, establish is the output in line with the level of to which extent that person had been able to perform at a certain level. A lot of training is on-the-job training, but ultimately you need to establish, and that is why you should have a performance management system, is to establish, given your either prior experience, your on-the-job training that you receive now, what would be a fair expectation as to the output, performance output that can be expected from the employer. And if the employer-employee is not on the same page, then there has to be a form of communication where that discrepancy can be investigated to establish what is valid and what not. I wouldn't say just give a warning for that, but if you feel that, listen, I give you instruction to do something, it is within your capabilities to perform it adequately, and you then refuse to do that or fail to do that, that is where the warning would then come into play, because you had a definite instruction to do, or you knew what was the right thing to do because of the level of training that you have received, and then you, with no valid reason, you failed to perform that task. Hence, then the warning for the negligence, because it's easier to prove. But it comes back to the principle of, was the person capable and able to perform at your level of expectation? Even though it might be only partial training done at that time, would it be fair to expect a person with that partial training still to give you a certain adequate output for which you want to hold him accountable for? But yeah, I don't know if that gives you some clarity, Rina.
Perfect. Thank you, Andries. All right, so it's now my turn. And yeah, so I'm going to take the position of the devil's advocate. So as a recruiter, my job is obviously to find the right people for the right companies. And more so often than not, I'm interviewing candidates who are unhappy in their jobs. And I mean, I've actually interviewed over the past 2 years about 2,600 candidates, and not one of them were happy in their jobs. So the amount of data I have on unhappy people at their companies is astronomical. So I'm going to be covering a bit of their side of the story, and also like how companies through their culture and their leadership can actually almost force candidates to leave their jobs and be very unhappy. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so that I can show you my lovely presentation. Let's get that started. There we go. Okay. All right, so obviously, I don't know if I've formally introduced myself to everyone. My name is Nicky, and I'm an office manager, but also a recruiter. And I've been a recruiter for quite a few years now. And my specialty is insurance jobs. So I know this might not apply to everyone, but I mean, candidates are candidates, no matter what job they're in. People are people, you know. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing with you the opposite position of what makes candidates unhappy, you know, and how you should be helping them actually be happier in their jobs. So let's get started. So most of the time when I interview candidates, they speak about how unhappy they are in their current job. And a lot of the times, there are actually things that companies don't realize that they are doing that's causing their candidates unhappiness. And most of the time, candidates won't speak to the companies about what's causing them to be unhappy for various reasons. Maybe they're scared they'll lose their job or whatever the case is. But let me chat to you a bit more about how this reputation or bad culture in a company can start. So normally it starts off between a large divide between management and staff. Now, often when I interview managers, funny enough, they go, oh, I don't know why the staff are so unhappy. They just keep leaving. And, you know, I'm not happy, so I want to leave too. And often managers don't know why the staff keep leaving, and it's quite scary to see the huge divide between the ground level staff and the management. So they actually almost don't talk to each other most of the time. It's almost like the management comes in, does a few instructions, and then disappears again. And so there's a huge divide between the two, and management often don't know what's really going on in the company. So funny enough, I'll interview people in the same company, and the manager will say, oh, the staff keep leaving, I'm not happy, you know, the boss is on me the whole time, I think it's time for me to leave. And then I interview the staff, and the staff go, oh, this manager's horrible, you know, they keep doing this or that. And the manager's actually not aware of what they are doing to affect the staff. So again, speaking about the management, the division between management and staff, what I'm finding now more is that candidates are wanting more of a flat structure. They're not enjoying the hierarchy so much of, you know, the manager says we need to do this, so we have to do this. They want to be spoken to more as an equal rather than being instructed. And that's causing a lot of unhappiness in the staff nowadays. Another topic is poor management. So this is a very broad topic, and I can't spend too much time going into that. But basically, candidates often complain that they aren't happy because of how management is. Now, management can often be sometimes actually very cruel to their staff because they don't realize that the staff might be under other pressure. They don't really put themselves in the shoes of their staff. And so I often see management going, oh, they're so slow with doing this, and they're terrible, and they're not listening to me, and X, Y, and Z, you know. And often the staff have so much more going on, not only in work, but in their own personal lives. And the management don't worry about that. They just worry about outputs, and they're not worried about the staff. And often taking that time to get to know your staff and getting to on a more personal level with them will help improve your reputation and improve your relationship with your staff. I mean, there are other ways of poor management. I mean, for example, I often hear managers shouting and demeaning staff and pointing them out in front of others. That's obvious ways that there is poor management in place. But you'll be surprised how many candidates I interview who do complain of that. You say, my manager shouts at me in front of everyone else, or they demean me, something like that. So the next topic is poor compensation. Now, this is actually, in these tough times, I'm finding salaries are obviously being cut, and even the market-related salaries are now not so market-related. They are obviously much lower, but I mean, that's understandable due to the circumstances. But even before that, I'm finding that companies, if they can get away with paying a staff member less, they will. And often they're not, staff members talk to each other. The staff talk, and they'll say, oh, listen, I'm only getting paid 12,000 Rand, and I've been here 5 years. And then the newbie comes along, not knowing how private and sensitive information is, goes and says, oh yeah, I got my pay this month, I'm so excited, I'm gonna go shopping. And the older staff member says, but how? Like, we can barely afford to make ends meet. And they go, oh, I've got 15,000 Rand. And that's exactly where the problem starts. And I have a lot of candidates who complain about this, that there's uneven pay. For the same job, you have different people getting paid different amounts. And I promise you it will get out. Even though you might have a confidentiality clause in your agreement, somehow it will get out that some people are getting paid more than others. And this causes a lot of unhappiness, especially staff who've been there for many, many years. If they find out someone else is getting paid more than them, you're pretty much asking them to leave, you know, that sort of thing. So the next thing is matters not dealt with effectively or quickly. So what often happens is Susie will come to you and say, listen, Mark is being mean to me. I think he's harassing me a bit. Maybe he's been after me for a while, something like that. And as a manager, of course, you have a lot of work to do, and you think, oh, well, it's not that serious. I'll get to it eventually. But then as time goes by, nothing is done. And eventually Susie gets so upset that she leaves. And then you think, oh, I've just lost a brilliant staff member. I don't know why she didn't give me another chance to address this. But, you know, staff obviously get, you know, they want their issues dealt with quickly and effectively. They want to know you helping them. They want to know you trying. And they don't always realize as management how much responsibility you have. So again, it's that miscommunication between the different levels. As a staff member, you might not understand the full responsibility of a manager. And as a manager, you might not understand the full responsibility of your staff because you're not in each other's shoes. So as a manager, your job should be to address things as quickly as possible. If you even get a whiff of a problem with someone, rather just chat to them. Don't make it so formal. A lot of the time, managers make things very formal. Oh, we have to have a meeting, you know, have the minutes taken of this meeting. But no, you can often, even in the kitchen, bump into them and say, hey, how's Mark doing? I know you said to me last week he was being a bit mean to you. How's things going? How are you feeling about it? I want you to know I am thinking about you. I'm just, I've got a few things on my plate at the moment. I promise you, you are top of my mind. As soon as I get this big project out the way, I will help you and I'll address things with Mark. Something as small as talking to your staff casually like that will completely help, because I find management often ignore the issues. Well, they're not really ignoring them, but to the staff, they appear like they're ignoring them. So you need to deal with matters effectively and quickly. And if you can't, make sure the staff member is kept up to date on what's happening. Because again, if your silence is taken as you don't care. So just chat to your staff. And this is again another reason why people leave companies, because they have a complaint and they feel nothing is being done about it. But often what happens is management will take it further and maybe something's changed, but the staff member isn't informed. So they don't know that things have changed or improved. So to them, you've just ignored them. And that's why they leave, because they feel like you don't care about them. Okay, so next is how to identify if you have a bad culture. Now, remember earlier I said that there's a huge divide between management and staff. Often when I interview management, they say they've been there for years. They're like, yeah, things are okay. I'm just looking for new opportunities. I'm actually happy, but I'm wanting something better. And then I interview the staff, and the staff say, oh, no, horrible place to work. This is the worst place ever. They treat their staff terribly. And management or the owners of the company are completely oblivious to how unhappy their staff are. And so these are some factors to keep in mind is if you do have a bad reputation or a bad culture. So a good question to ask is, how long does your average employee last? So staff turnaround is an instant indicator of how happy your staff are. So I would say if your staff are staying anything below a year and every year you're replacing, there is a huge problem. So in some instances, call centers, you don't really expect people to stay long, but generally in a company, if you keep on replacing positions year to year, there is a problem that you need to address. I would say even up to two years, there might be some unhappiness there. But I'm finding with the trend nowadays of especially millennials coming into the office environment, the general period of employment is 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years. That people just change jobs a lot nowadays, and it seems to be a general trend. As I said, I've interviewed a lot of people, and sometimes when people keep hopping jobs every 2 years, and I say to them, why do you keep hopping like this? It's been 2 years with every company, the past 6 companies, it's been every 2 years. And they normally don't really give me a clear answer. It's normally like, I stopped learning at that company. I felt like I'd reached the point where there's nothing more for me to do. There's no room for me to grow. And so I need to keep growing, keep moving, and keep moving forward. So that seems to be the general attitude nowadays of more the young people, of how they want to keep moving and growing. So as a company, it's your responsibility to keep pushing your staff in the right way and keep helping them grow. But yeah, so normally, if you're having staff leave every year, maybe even every 2 years, it's not a good indication of your culture in your company. It means there's something not right. There's something that's making them unhappy. Next is if staff are protective over their lunch breaks. And this is quite a common one where the 12 o'clock bell rings and your staff are gone. You can't get a hold of them. And if you ask them to help you with anything, they give you they roll the eyes and it's, oh, why should I help you? This is my lunch break, and they get very protective over their lunch breaks. And I'm not saying that everyone who is protective of their lunch breaks is unhappy. What I'm trying to say is I normally find that people that are very possessive over their time and their hours, their own personal time, they're normally not very happy. And so you find that staff who are happy to give up a lunch break every now and then to help you, those are normally a good indicator that the staff is they're feeling good and they're happy in their job. So next is quite an obvious one. Most people are aware of this, but if there's an abuse of sick leave, or any type of leave really. So every second week someone in the family is dying, and you never know if it's true or not, and they often, on Mondays or Fridays, they're often off sick, and you get this really sketchy looking doctor's note and you don't know if it's real or not. So that means the employee is not happy. Now again, as a company, you might say, oh, but the staff member's useless, that's why they keep doing all these things. But at the end of the day, everyone's got the capabilities and you hired them for their skills. So, you didn't want to hire them for them to abuse their sick leave. So if they are doing these signs, if they are showing these signs, rather just chat to them and maybe even do performance management, as Andries mentioned earlier, because you can see there's something not right. So another one, a small one, but this I see quite a bit as well, is let's just say you close at 4:30, and at 4:15 you already notice your staff are packing up. So it's like their attitude is they're not going to spend a second longer in this office as much as they have to. So by 4:15, they're closing up, they're packing up. So when 4:30 arrives, they're out the door again. You know, you're not going to see them and you're not going to hear from them. So that's also another indicator that staff aren't happy. So again, I'm not promising that every single one of these show your staff aren't happy. This is just generally from me interviewing a lot of candidates. This is how I can pick up that they're not engaged in their jobs. Because if they are fully engaged and happy, they won't mind giving up their lunch break every now and then. They don't mind staying a bit later every now and then. And they often won't take leave. And even if they are sick, you have to chase them home because they're so dedicated to their jobs. So these are good indicators for managers or owners of companies if you have a bad culture or bad reputation. Okay. Next is actually ways that you can keep your staff. So a lot of time I find due to the mismanagement of the company, they treat their staff so unfairly that the staff end up leaving. And often these staff members or management see them as useless. They actually might be very decent staff members, but because management is so hard on their staff, it brings out the worst in them. And so, you know, there's this huge, again, divide between what management thinks and what the actual staff think. So I'm going to cover some things on how to keep your staff happy and how to keep them engaged in their jobs and how to keep them, you know, obviously employed by you. So besides the obvious thing of paying the employee decently, there are other reasons why people often leave jobs. And I did touch on this a bit earlier. So no room for growth. I'm finding a huge trend of candidates wanting to grow, wanting to learn, wanting to be pushed. Now I'm finding that, especially the young ones coming in now, it's if they're not growing, they're not learning, they're going to want to move to the next opportunity. So you have to constantly provide opportunities for your staff to grow, besides monetarily, but also you can add in extra responsibilities to them and explain to them how this will help them grow. So what often happens is companies go, oh yeah, but I'm helping my staff member learn. I'm giving them, you know, the next person's job to do, but of course I'm not paying them more. We don't have the money for that. And then the staff gets unhappy. So if you're going to give them more responsibility, you do need to compensate them fairly. So another one is not being heard or their opinions don't matter. Now, I did touch on this earlier, where there are issues and they come to you and they speak to you and nothing is done, where they feel you haven't done enough. So that you need to address. But also, I'm finding staff are wanting more of a flat structure. They're wanting to feel equal to the managers. And so often staff will say, oh, I've got this awesome idea for our next promotion. Here it is, this is my idea. And the managers go, okay, well, that's not really how we do things. And then they can move on. You know, so this is where their opinion doesn't matter and they don't feel like they're contributing to the growth of the company. So how you can engage your employees more is by making sure they know that they have a say in the company. They need to know that they matter. So next one is no recognition or no incentives. So, I mean, this is such a silly thing, but often staff get paid the same salary every month. It's the same thing every month. But often if you offer incentives, so the way you get your staff to stretch and do more than what they're currently doing is by offering incentives. So for example, you could say, I mean, in a sales environment, that's quite easy to do. So if you do an extra 50 or 60 calls this month, you get an extra $100 or something like that. You know, it's a bad example, but something like that, you can actually put incentives in place. So if you get through an extra 3 or 4 hours of paperwork, we'll give you this pavilion voucher or something like that. So incentives really work well to help the staff stretch a bit more. And recognition is saying thank you. And I find this so much with very young, between 20 to 30 years old, the really young millennials. It matters a lot to them that you recognize what they do. And it's so weird. It's such a stereotype. And, you know, I feel bad because I'm a millennial myself, but it is so true. We want to know that you appreciate what we're doing for you. And it's such a weird thing. And I do understand for the older generation, they're like, why should we say thank you for doing your job, you know? But it's just, you know, a little thank you and showing a little bit of appreciation. I promise you, it makes a huge difference. Something so small can make such a big difference. So I just, when staff perform their job and perform it well, let them know, you know, well done. I'm so proud of you. You did this so well, you know, and if they're doing something wrong, you let them know as soon as possible. Never leave things hanging. Okay, so poor management, we covered that a bit, and also overwork. So I'm seeing this a lot, especially nowadays, with people being retrenched, and then the entire finance department is being downsized to 2 or 3 people. But now these 2 or 3 people is doing the job of 10 people, you know, and this is a common thing that often happens. And there's no recognition, there's no increased pay. They just have to now just suck it up and do it. Although they're happy to do this under extreme circumstances like COVID, but as soon as the company is able to hire more people, they need to do this, because overworked people, I mean, I often interview people who go, I'm actually doing 2 or 3 people's jobs at once, and so you need to actually make sure that they are being compensated properly and that they're not overworked. Okay, so next is to keep staff happy, you need to give them an open door policy. Let them know that their voices are heard. You need to include them in decision-making opportunities so they feel part of the company and they feel engaged. Okay, so I think my last slide is coming up. Okay, so I'm actually studying industrial psychology at the moment, and coincidentally, my one topic that I'm covering at the moment, my one module, is modern cultures in the workplace. So I thought I'd share this with you guys, how things are changing in the workplace. And I did touch on this a little bit earlier, so I'm going to be repeating myself here. But the first one is an easygoing work culture. So this is something where there's less hierarchy, more of a flat structure, more improvisation. So I'm found, well, according to my manual, my study manual, that people don't like very strict rules. They want to be able to chop and change where they can and have the freedom to do so. So a less serious work environment and less focus placed on punctuality. Now, I know a lot of you are laughing because your young staff are arriving late the whole time, but it's just the way modern work cultures are changing now. So a lot more flexibility in place and a lot more equal pay structures. So I did touch on this earlier, where if someone finds out they're getting paid more or less, it can affect things. So in summary, an easygoing work discipline is the new trend coming up in companies. Less hierarchy, more of a flat structure, more improvisation, more flexibility, a less serious work environment, and less focus placed on punctuality. Next is more of a personal connection. So this goes very much hand in hand with hierarchy. So employees identifying more personally with the boss. So almost like being chummies with the boss, I know the older generation will be like, oh, the boss is the boss. You don't talk to them like that. But young people don't see it that way. And so they want to be almost friends with the boss. And they also want very strong social connections with their teammates. So they don't just want to come into work and go home. They want to have fun with their colleagues. They want to go out and do things. And this is where it's coming in now in modern companies. You're finding this more and more. They're having staff parties and they're going out after work to have some beers or whatever the case is. This is a modern trend that's coming up. Next is a more open work environment, so more culturally diverse. So in recruitment, I'm finding that it's still a very big stereotype. Certain companies will only employ certain types of people. And it's actually now coming out to be more and more damaging. So for example, you may have a company that only employs females, or only employs males, or only prefers a certain race or something like that. They're actually shooting themselves in the foot, because within the scope of diversity, there is so much room for growth and learning from other cultures. And funny enough, there's actually stats that prove more diverse teams are more successful. So yeah, the modern culture is that of more diverse teams and being accepting to more different types of people. And lastly, it's the employee-orientated organizations. And this is quite a touchy topic, because I'm finding a lot of my candidates that I interview feel very strongly about this point, but yet management are very against it. So what employee-orientated organizations is a culture where members of the staff feel that personal problems are taken into account and the organization takes responsibility for its welfare of its employees. Now, I don't want you to think you are now responsible for your employee's sick mom, that sort of thing. It's not that intense, but employees want to feel that you care about them, that you've taken their personal circumstances into account. So for example, I had it actually yesterday, I interviewed a candidate who quit her job because she obviously lives with her family, who are all high risk COVID people. So in other words, they have pre-existing conditions, very high risk. And her company happened to be a level 5 company, which means they had to be open throughout the whole lockdown. She could not go into work because she lived with a family that was high risk, and obviously very old parents. If they got COVID, they would probably pass away. And she said this to her management: listen, I can work from home, I can keep doing this, but I cannot go into work. I really don't want to put my family at risk. And they refused. They absolutely refused. And they made it so difficult for her that she actually quit. And when I did her reference check, it checked out. The management actually even admitted to this. So they're very lucky there wasn't a CCMA case about this. But this is what I'm finding, is that employees want you to take their personal circumstances into account. So mothers want you to understand they have children and when they take off time to attend their child's gala, you shouldn't penalize them. You know, and I'm often finding that, for example, mothers are penalized because they need to look after their sick children. So when the next promotion comes up, the companies won't promote them or won't help them or give them an increase because they keep taking time off to look after their child. So there needs to be a middle ground. I'm not saying that you should just give and give and give and give, and, you know, the employee keeps taking and taking and taking. What I'm saying is that there should be a middle ground, and you should speak to your staff and let them understand that you understand their circumstances, and you need to come to a middle ground. It's very easy to do that if you sit them down and chat to them and say, okay, what are you willing to give? And this is what I'm willing to give. And this is what this is a big deal. I'm actually interviewing a lot of staff who complain that the companies don't care about them. All that matters is that they're producing money, and that's it. And they keep working them to the bone. And I understand we are in a third world country. We don't have the luxury of having lots of money lying around. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is companies take into consideration your employees' feelings, their situations, and try and help them when you can. So for example, if you have an employee who is in a difficult circumstance at home, you know, they maybe don't have food or whatever the case is, you can actually try and help them. And this will actually help the employee see you in a different light and help them be engaged in their work, because now they've seen you've gone an extra mile for them. So that's the last topic of employee engagement and how to actually see the modern culture trends coming into the office place. So yeah, just keep that in mind that going forward in the future, you're going to need to be a lot more level with your staff, include them a lot more in what you do, and have a bit more diversity in companies. As a recruiter, I'm still seeing a lot of people who only employ certain types of people, and it's very sad really, because they're shooting themselves in the foot. If you're only employing a certain type of person, you're actually not helping your company grow at all. So just keep that in mind, and keep in mind your employees' lives, and include them as much as you can into the company. But yeah, so I think that's about it from my presentation. That's it. I'm 5 minutes early. I normally run over time, so that's great. Does anyone have any questions for me on anything? So that I'm going to actually leave this open here so you guys can see our details. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask now, and we can actually see if we can help you with anything. But yeah, my presentation was basically just to show you the other side of the coin. A lot of people feel, a lot of managers are very negative towards their staff. Oh, they're useless, they don't help me, they don't do this, they don't do that. And a lot of the time the staff have got very genuine reasons for wanting to leave their companies, or maybe they're underperforming because of an incident that happened before, and no one speaks about it. You know, it's kind of swept under the rug, and management hopes that nothing comes up again, but it always does. And the staff remembers something you could have done a year ago that was never resolved. It's still bugging them. You know, you need to have an open door policy with your staff. Yeah, so I'm not seeing any questions. Andries, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, I think someone said, yeah, because of the virus, everything changes, but there's at the same time a lot of things that don't change. And I think it is that awareness of to understand what is changing in the landscape, how the people's value systems, attitudes, backgrounds change, and you need to adapt. And I think that the question here is for employers not to rely on, we've been doing this for our way for the past 10 years and we never had issues. The mere fact that it's like going over a red robot and not get caught, it still doesn't make it legal. So you need to look forward to decide to say, how does the landscape change? And it's critical. I think you correctly pointed out that the people change and you have to adapt, but you can't compromise on accountability. You pay 100%, you expect 100% back, but maybe the how changes, but the what needs to happen, you can never compromise. And it's the challenge, I think, for our employers and management is to adapt appropriately in line with that.
Okay, perfect. Well, I don't see any questions. So guys, thank you so much for your time. And Andries, thank you so much for your insights. It was really, really interesting, and it's always fascinating listening to you. But yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.